musicians, classical and jazz musicians. And so all of our labels are beautiful paintings done by a fabulous artist, Mimi Stewart. And it's part of her musical gem series. And almost all of them have a big treble clef. One of them has a bass clef with notes kind of going in all directions. And we've given musical names to all the wines, like our Sauvignon Blanc is called Serenaded Blanc. The Merlot is Minuet and Merlot.
Well, the cab is the one that you know the best, and yeah, that is the lyric of the vine, and that's also the name of the painting that's on the label.
Yeah, the cab is very familiar with that. It's a fantastic wine. We serve it every year, thanks to you guys, at the Taste Awards reception. It's very well received. People love it. And you're right, it does have, well, I won't say it has lyrical notes because that would just be too literal, but it has a lot of fantastic notes. It's an awesome Cabernet. Now, we're here, for anyone who has just joined us, we are here with Barbara Brown and Kevin Brown of R&B Cellars. And we are here to talk about the collaboration wine that they have done in honor of the Taste Awards. And in collaboration with TasteTV, called Domaine de Taste. And this particular one is called The Gift.
Here it is.
There it is. It has a beautiful bottle of Chateau in France.
Yeah.
And it's the wine. We're very proud of the label because it's very colorful, pops very much. And of course, we're very proud of this wine. So this wine is a mix of Mourvedre, Syrah, and Zinfandel. I'm actually going backwards.
Right. It's predominantly Zinfandel, and then Mourvedre, equal parts of Mourvedre and Petit Syrah, and then as just one extra special little flavoring, kind of like when you're finishing a sauce or whatever, when you're cooking, there's a little bit of Viognier in there as well. So Viognier, which is very typical. I mean, in the Rhone red blends, oftentimes, even the Syrahs, there'll be 1 or 2 or 3% of Viognier blended back in, just to kind of soften the mouthfeel just a touch, kind of round it out more in the mid palate. And that's kind of the decision that we decided to do with this wine.
So this wine, when we talked to you originally about let's do something together, you had already a good idea of what you wanted to create. And could you tell us a little bit about what has gone into how you decided what the blend would be for this specifically?
Well, I will say first, I'll let him pretty much tell you about this as the winemaker, but I know that you were kind of looking for a big and bold. So that was kind of the first thing that we were concentrating on.
Well, I mean, the underlying the big and bold, but also something that's a nice departure from the cab. I mean, people know what they're going to expect from cabs, especially our cab. It's very big, it's very robust. And we wanted this to be big, but at the same time with an elegance or an approachability to it. So big but soft.
Big but soft. Absolutely. Well, I've had it, and it meets that description.
And that's the kind of the fun thing. So I mean, we're known for Zinfandels as well as the Cabernet. Cabernet was our first thing, what we became most famous for, and then the Zinfandel probably right behind that. But Zinfandel, one of the great blenders in Zinfandel, they almost get married, at least in my experience of winemaking and the wineries that I've worked with, like Rosenblum Cellars and such, Petit Syrah, blended with Zinfandel, it's almost required. A little Petit Syrah and vice versa, and in the Petit Syrah, a tiny bit of Zinfandel. So we already knew that it was going to be a Zin and Petit Syrah, but then what else could kind of flesh it out a little bit further and maybe add a little bit more exotic spice or, some of those kind of notes to it. And Mourvedre is always a wonderful choice for that. It tends to be a little brighter, accentuates a little brighter red fruits to it. The Zinfandel in this particular one is all from Contra Costa, and that fruit profile tends to be more of a red berry fruit, cherries, red cherries. Some strawberries, that's typical fruit profile from Contra Costa. But then adding a little Mourvedre to it kind of accentuates that, but then also marries into the Petit Syrah a little bit. And then just at the finish, once we did that, we says, okay, it's a big wine. but we wanted a little more softness. And I think we all agreed mutually that a little more softness to it was going to be a good thing to do. And that's when I said, you know, a couple of percent of Viognier, that'll be the precise prescription of just balancing all of that out so that you get that that broader mid palate and a slightly softer finish to it.
Absolutely. Now, how would you compare this? Not how would you compare, but have you ever had a wine that tastes similar to this?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, a lot of the proprietary red blends that you find out there right now are kind of interesting because they all go on this, what's the best way to describe it? The mélange madness, you know, of where it's a series of different flavors that kind of integrate or move from one to the other. Probably, I guess, the most overarching thing on a lot of the red blends that initially came out was there was a little bit of a residual sugar or residual sweetness to them, which is fine. I mean, that was, you know, for some people that's what they like, but for us, the trick was really getting more that transition between, because the softness, that residual sugar aspect of it, for someone who's not as maybe not as sophisticated or as regular a wine drinker or doesn't like the bigger wines, it's appealing. But for the bigger wine drinker, you lose them because it doesn't have that component complexity that they're looking for. And on the other side, if you did the component complexity but you didn't have the nice transition, then for somebody, and I always describe it this way, you know, everybody starts in the swimming pool someplace. And while you might be in shallow water to begin with, my job is to coax you into deeper water, and that you're comfortable there, right? That you're comfortable being in the deeper water. So when we created our first red blend, which was the improviser, the whole purpose of that is also a Zin base, but it's 6 different varietals. So we had Mourvedre and Petit Syrah and Cabernet or Cab Franc and Merlot and Barbera. So I mean, it was this, you know, we describe it, I mean, lovingly, as the kitchen sink wine, and it really isn't. It's just that's what ended up making the blend that I thought, okay, that kind of covers all these bases I'm trying to get to. And we actually did this for a wholesaler back in the Midwest who was the Gallo House. So they represented Apothic. And Apothic is one of those red blends. It's very popular. It sells extremely well, but it has a little bit of residual sweetness to it. And they said, can you do a red blend that's more serious? It can be more expensive, a little higher price point, that's fine, but something that's more serious. And that's why I started getting into this thought process of that transitional thing of taking people where I still get those folks, but I'm coaxing them to slightly deeper water. But the folks who are out there swimming way out in the waves, they're totally comfortable with it. And they're like, oh, I get the Barbera, or I noticed the Petite or the Mourvedre. And so you're getting something that kind of is pleasing for everyone. And based on our reviews and the success of how the wine sells, I mean, we've been very successful with that.
So the improviser came out, what, like 9
years ago,
something like that. Yeah. And since then, you know, it's always the same varietals, but it's always a different, you know,
slightly different
amount. And it's a non-vintage, so that we have the most flexibility, so that we can, every time we put a new blend together, it's as close as possible to the last.
Or at least close in that flavor profile. But what's interesting is most years we probably could have vintage dated it. But I'm a big believer that the wine should just stand on its own. The wine should speak for itself. And a vintage date doesn't make it say that. And the word reserve doesn't make it say that. And estate bottled and all that other stuff.
Does not have a vintage date because, you know, it just worked out that way. Sometimes the better bottle of wine is going to be made with a couple of different vintages, you know?
Our most expensive bottle of wine that we make, which is the Bordeaux blend. Again, we put that together, and the best blend was a combination of 2 vintages of Cabernet, 10 and 12, and then 12 Merlot and 12 Cab Franc. And we did this for a major steakhouse chain based out of the Midwest. And when I finally put the blend together, and I said, but here's the deal, it's not vintage dated, and you have to be willing to accept that. And so the buyer actually came out, stayed with us at our house, and we went through all the blending trials with him the same way that I had done before. And he kept on going, God, it's close, it's just meeting it, just missing something. I said, okay, do this one. He said, that's it. I said, yeah, that's the one I put together. And he said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go with no
Non-vintage.
vintage date, but here's the part of the bargain you have to do. You have to make a video where you explain to people why you're not putting a vintage date on it. And I'm going to use that to train all my staff and all of my restaurants and show customers if they want to know why. It's like, that's fine. And it's the most expensive bottle of wine that we produce. And there's no vintage date.
Doing blends, that's when Kevin's in his happy place.
It sounds like he's an alchemist in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, it's kind of fun. And I learned that, to be perfectly honest, when my days at Rosenblum with Kent Rosenblum, because he was exactly the same approach about it. And I can't think of the number of wines that, we worked on together in terms of tasting and deciding on final blends or whatever. But Kent was always of the philosophy that, the best wine is going to be the final blend, that there is nothing that you just say it should be 100% varietal. I mean, you really need to, if you want to make the best wine, you have to be open to the willingness to adding other things. Sometimes you don't, it happens.
Now, a question I have is that on the gift that we have right here, it says Vintner's Blend. It actually does. It does. It says Vintner's
Yes,
Blend.
it does. It's Vintner's Blend.
Yeah, Vintner's Red
So,
Blend.
Vintner's Red Blend. Now, what does that mean specifically to you and to the person who's drinking it?
Well, the vintner, that's me, and with Barbara, is my assistant vintner. We're the vintners. I mean,
I taste the blends. That's how I'm the assistant winemaker. But it's a very important.
It is. She signs off on all of it. I mean, if she doesn't sign off on it, I'd say, okay, I guess I have more work to do. But I mean, the concept is it's something that we've gone through and tasted through, and that when we've assembled this, it isn't just something that you go, well, it should be X percent of this and Y percent of that and Z percent of that and A percent of that. It's something that it's all done by our taste and going and actually playing around with it and saying, that's not quite right. Back this off a little bit, beef that up a little bit. Nope, got to add a little bit of that. You know what? That Petit Sirah, that one's from Lake County, that one's from Napa. I did a little bit more than Napa, a little less of the lake, reverse it. No, more of the lake, less. I mean, so it really comes down to what we are tasting and putting this together.
Now, when I cook, let's say when I cook, I'm pretty much a recipes are guidelines type of person, right? I'm not sort of recipes are exact instructions. I'm more of a recipes are sort of a recommendation. Suggestions.
Yeah.
Well, it's a step in the place.
But when you're doing your wine blends, of course, how are you keeping track? What's your process for keeping track of how much of X, Y, Z you're putting together and where they're from and all that?
Well, actually,
or is it a bit of like Fantasia where you got the sorcerer's pot?
There's a bit of
that. There's a little bit of it. I mean, from years of doing this, I know I have a general idea of where percentages might be, especially when I taste base products and I go, okay, this is, I can kind of, in my mind, already visualize a little bit of where the percentages are going to be and know the things that are going to add to it and kind of the differences that they'll make in the final blend.
And also depending on what barrels the wine is sitting in and all of that, it all goes into that equation. Also, keep in mind that, wine changes over time. So while you might keep a notation of what the first gift was, and the next time we want to, put together a bottling, we'll want to try to keep it as close as possible. It may be a different one. It may be it might have to be slightly altered.
So the other aspect of answering your question is that, once I know the basic components I want to play with, then I will put some in each glass. And actually, this is a holdover from Kent, veterinary syringes. So we have like the 60 cc one, and you have the 10 cc one, the 5 cc one, and the 1 cc one. And so that I can then very precisely measure out and say, okay, if it's going to be 100 cc's and I know I want to be, around 70%, I'll take 70 cc's of the Zin, and then I'll put in, 12 and a half of the Petite and 12 and a half of the Mourvedre, and then, save a little bit and say, okay, now I got still room for my couple of percent of Viognier and see how that plays with it. And then you start to maneuver around it as you're tasting and determining, okay, what's missing, or how do I move the needle a little bit more to where I want that to be for that final flavor that's in my mind.
Now, speaking of aging and all that, I know that just came up a second. What's in barrel? I noticed the barrels behind you.
Yeah.
What kind of barrels are you using?
It's predominantly French oak, 10 different cooperages that we work with, and also some American oak that we do as well, from French cooperages, not from American coopers. It's a very interesting thing that they do. They actually take oak from America and take it over to France or take it to Australia and then age it there, and then cooper the barrels and then send it back here, or they send the staves back after they've been aged over there. And you say, okay, what's the difference between aging them here and aging them there? Well, what's in the air in France is not what's in the air in the United States, and vice versa, or Australia. So how the wood ages and the characters that it takes on and what it picks up are very different in each spot. And each cooper has their own style and personality.
So they are coopered in the United States, sent to France to age, and then brought back?
Not coopered, the staves are cut, and the staves are sent over, aged over there, and then brought back, and then coopered here.
Back.
Or sometimes coopered over there and then sent over. It happens both directions, both ways.
Interesting. I was reading an article, or maybe I was watching some video about an Australian winery, and they were really, I can't even remember exactly, but something they were saying about their barrels had to do with the barrels were used. There are multiple used, and for some reason, I think they said they had been used in France previously, and then they brought them to Australia, and that's what they used for their wine. So is there a name for that practice of using previously used barrels from another winery?
Well, it's called using neutral barrels, and there are several reasons why you might use them. I'd say the most obvious one, or one used most often, is if you want to barrel some white wines, but you don't really want to impart oak flavorings. That's often a nice way just to add some roundness to the wine.
Or balancing out in red wines, a certain percentage of new oak and a certain percent of aged oak, which is more subtle in terms of what it imparts to the wine.
Interesting.
And
so I saw
the wine, what it is you want to do, and what that end result is, as to whether you would use a percentage of neutral oak in the program.
Now, I just saw Kevin reach for a piece of charcuterie in front of you, because we've got a little charcuterie. You've got some cheese.
We do.
Well, and our glasses are
and actually that piece was for Loki, the winery dog.
The winery dog. You got to have a winery dog. Loki, L-O-K-I.
Sitting here with us, and he put his paw up on my leg, kind of telling Dad, "Hey, Dad, where is my salami?"
Well, because he gave him a piece of salami not too long ago, and so he's a deserving dog, of course. But
he's a very patient dog. So let's go through. Tell us how to taste this particular wine and how to pair it with some of the wines and cheeses that you've selected.
Well, like anything, the whole thing's, you're pouring some of the glass not too full, enough so that when you're swirling it around, like this, that it has some room to be able to open up within the glass. The whole purpose is just to get some oxygen into the wine, which it atomizes a certain amount of the wine, kind of like if you're thinking of the spray bottle for a perfume, and that what allows the perfume to really open up and to get all the essences of what's going on is adding some oxygen, some air to it, and then interacting with the skin and the rest of it. With wine, similar kind of thing, a little bit of interaction with the inside of the glass, because even though glass, you say, hey, it's smooth and shiny, it really isn't. It's actually microscopically, it's quite rough. So as the wine spins around inside of it, it opens up and it allows the oxygen to get into it and then release the phenolics, which is that chemical compound, which is what you smell and what you taste.
And it's the legs that you see coming down.
Right, and that's glycerol, which is a type of alcohol that your mouth perceives as fruit sweetness, not sugar sweetness. So when you're kind of getting some of those fruity aspects of wines, it's not just the actual liquid that you're tasting, it's also some of the glycerols that are part of that whole package that's the wine.
Now, two things, actually. I want to talk about the legs. Someone asked me the other day, how long do you recommend having your wine lie down before serving?
It depends on which one. Oh, before serving.
Before the gift here.
To breathe? To
Well, they phrase it as to lie down.
Well, to lie down would generally imply aging. How long can a wine age? And they all vary. Okay.
like our Napa
So-
Reserve Cabernet, I mean, we still have some of the first vintage 1997, and it's still good.
Yeah.
It's still delicious. It's a little leaner than it was, but I mean, there's some wines that can be laid, you know, for years.
You can
and
lay them down for
decades.
decades, but I'm going to use a different analogy, which I think people might understand a little bit better, which isn't wine, it's people. So
I know this one.
so you meet somebody and you know them when they're younger and you say, oh, you know, I really like that person. Another person meets them and says, I don't know. They seem a little aggressive or a little obnoxious. They need to mellow, right? And so, you know, go ahead 10 years or 20 years, and all of a sudden the person who didn't care for that individual when they were younger all of a sudden says, look how much they've matured and settled down, and, you know, they got married and they have kids, and, you know, now they seem so much more balanced. And then the person who really liked that more aggressive, more vibrant personality of the youth says, they're kind of boring, they're kind of dull now, you know. But then age another 10 or 20 years, and all of a sudden maybe the person who thought that they were dull in their middle age all of a sudden says, you know, they've really become a fascinating older person. You know, I mean, with all this experience and depth and all this stuff that's going on. And the person who said they were really great when they were in the middle age, but they kind of lost some of that vibrancy that I would, you know. So
Where does their smudgy part come in?
so the smudgy, well,
Classic Kevin.
this was actually a story I told at a wine dinner, and I said, you know, to people, you know, they were asking about when to pick the fruit. And I said, well, it's the squidgy factor. And they said, the squidgy factor says, well, it's when they're physiologically, when the fruit is perfect, and it's not just a numbers game. It's more about the physical aspect. When you pull it away from the reticle, that, you know, okay, how easily did it? How much pulp is left on it? You know, all of these different aspects of evaluating the fruit. How are the seeds brown? Are they green? You know, what are the tannin structures like in the skins? Is it bitter or is it starting to smooth out? What kind of acid profile are you getting in the, and so all of this together becomes the decision-making process of when you decide to pick the fruit, when it's right. And it's not just a numbers game. So I described this as the squidgy factor. And so all these women were telling me, okay, what's the squidgy factor? I says, okay, well, you're all, you know, you're here with your boyfriends, your husbands, and we're all, you know, middle-aged at this point. Says, so tell me right now, I want everybody to raise their hand who doesn't think that their husband is a better person, a more attentive person, a better listener, a better lover, a better everything now than when you first got together with them, maybe when they were 18 years old. I said, yes, they were handsome, they were chiseled, they were, you know, the 300-pound linebacker or whatever turned you on at the time. But I think you're happier now because everything kind of melded together better. All the flavors coalesced. And now this is this more balanced, more interesting person. And who wouldn't rather have that now as your partner in life, as opposed to that, you know, that very young person? And everybody was absolutely, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the squidgy factor is, you know, okay, we may not be as handsome as we were. I mean, we have a little around the middle or something like that, but it's all those other aspects that make us a much better partner for
The
you.
squidgy factor, the squidgy factor. So if you were to lie this down, you're thinking maybe 5 years, 3 years, 10 years. Sounds like it's inevitable. It could go for a long time.
While it can, Zinfandel has a tendency to show its best in its youth. That's just my own personal observations about Zinfandel. It doesn't mean you can't age them. You can.
And as a matter of fact, we still have some 2014 Swingsville Zinfandel, and that's from Contra Costa, same vineyard where we, you know, the wine, the Zinfandel. And
Yeah, so that's a nice 6-year-old.
And it's tasting wonderful. That's 6 years old.
It's fabulous.
So, but by and large, you know, you don't want to lay this down for, you know, too long because it tends to be something you want to
So here's always
Sooner
my
than later.
suggestion to
So
people
drink.
about
It's more like drink now, or in the next couple of years. Enjoy it now.
that would be my suggestion. I mean, you can always buy more. We'll always make more. But the more important thing is when you do this, maybe get a few bottles and try one now. You know, make some note of your impressions of it and put a couple bottles away. You know, and then maybe come back 6 months, a year from now.
Now, let me ask you a question. Have you heard of, this is a bit off subject, but on subject. Have you heard about the wine key?
The wine thief.
The wine key.
key.
Wine key, yeah. So Peugeot, Peugeot, the French car manufacturer,
Right, yeah.
Peugeot brand, whatever you want to call it, they have a key. It's made of a special alloy. It will tell you how your wine will taste in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years from now. You put the key in the wine, in a glass, not in a barrel, and for every second that you keep it in there, it ages the wine for 1 year.
Oh, I'd be
So-
interested in checking that out.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's been validated to work. It won't actually age the wine, but it will change the flavor and the balance of everything, via oxidization, things like that, to replicate, that whole component. So
Yeah.
it's kind of fascinating. We've been really thinking about getting one of those. We might want to try it. But anyway, I totally got you off topic because I know anyone who's tasting this wants to know, how does it taste with what I'm going to pair? The cheese, charcuterie, the meats, the fish.
But first, let's just talk about how does it taste all on its own? Because that's the first sort of.
Boom, there you go.
So when, swirling it, smelling it, I'm getting darker berry and brighter, like red berry. I'm also getting some cocoa powder.
Well, and that's a function of the barrels. That kind of cocoa powder, chocolate kind of tone to it. That's totally a function of the barrel. Nothing to do with the fruit. And keeping in mind, people say, well, do you add cocoa powder to it? Do you add cherries? And it's like, no, you're just describing flavors that the taste of the wine reminds you of. So if you were going to describe something else that would be easier for people to latch on to, you try and use things that are
Blackberries and cherries.
more common associations that people would get, so that's why I describe it that way.
I often can, I've got a repertoire of words that I use. I don't have like 100 words, which I know some people have to describe wines, but I have words like leathery, smoky, tobacco, lavender, citrus,
Herbal.
some bit of chocolate, definitely always, the whole woodsy, earthy, mushroomy type of smells. Those, to me, they all kind of come together in the general, like I'm laying down in the woods kind of smell. But also that could be the same smell that you find in a cave, right? In a kind of a wet, damp wine cellar with barrels.
Well, I mean, with this wine, to me, it's very fruit driven. It's very fruit forward. And like what very early on in this conversation, what I was describing, like red cherries, like almost Montmorency cherries, which is a pie cherry, as opposed to a Bing cherry, which is a darker cherry. And that, then thinking, and you think, oh, cherry pie, and then you think of that brightness of the cherry flavors in a cherry pie. Don't talk about sweetness, just talk about that perception of the cherry flavor itself. It tends to be a little more focused and a little more forward.
A bit of a zingy too.
Yes, exactly. And that's a combination of not only the Contra Costa Zinfandel, but also a little of the Mourvedre that you're picking up, which is Lake County, which tends to do a little bit more of that exotic spice and kind of brings forward that kind of more pointed flavor. But a lot of that red berry fruit, I get some very subtle cocoa powder kind of things to it.
And I would say that my impression of tasting it after swirling and sniffing is they really do agree. The taste and the smell.
Now, let me ask you, are you getting, I don't have a bottle in front of me, unfortunately, but are you getting any orange in that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting any zest of orange in that?
I don't know that I would describe it so much as zest of orange as I would maybe say an exotic spice of some kind. More almost like, for me, I would say cardamom. you know, that you're picking up, you know,
Proud of
with
them.
those kind of slightly edgier, more forward spice components, brighter spices.
Very nice. Very. It sounds delicious. I know it's. I've had it, but I don't have one in front of me right now. So
Not
unfortunately, I
exactly.
cannot compare notes with you.
I'm
Well,
It's good
sorry.
because
And
anyone watching this, we want them to be able to really understand what they are tasting and what the notes are.
Again, keeping in mind that it is all subjective and that they may be tasting something different, you know, and have different impressions of what it is that they're smelling or tasting. But
Absolutely.
well, one
Now,
of the things that I get in this wine, you know, is like almost an afterthought, which I think it's a combination of the Viognier along with the Zinfandel, is a little candied violet, which is like this very subtle kind of waft. It kind of darts in and out. It's not there constantly or constantly present, but candied violets is a really interesting exotic flavor profile. And I
it
kinda
is. In
like
fact,
that.
I can see probably people really trying to dive in and trying to find that particular
Why
note.
not?
yeah, exactly.
Have the fun.
And then there's me who's just like, it's so suggestive, the power of suggestion. It's like, yeah, I got that, candied violets.
But I mean, one of the
So that's going to
most
be the top of
important
my
things-
list when I
However,
open the
anybody-
bottle next. When I open the bottle next, that is going to be the top of my list. Is to
Right, right.
try to search out the candy
For
violet.
that candied violets.
But
So
the-
maybe we should, oh, sorry.
The
go ahead.
real important thing, and we'll get to the food
Yeah.
here in just a second, is however anybody wants to describe a wine, that's perfectly fine. They could say, it reminds me of this really particular shade of red, and that's, I mean, that's okay. That's for them, how they want to describe it. There are no right or wrong answers. There's only your way of doing it. So people shouldn't be intimidated by folks who have lots of descriptors, you know?
Now I will describe this wine, if I remember correctly, and I'm looking at it. It's a deep red, isn't it? It's almost the name. What is that gemstone? That is
garnet?
a red.
Garnet.
A garnet. It's
Yep.
about a garnet red.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
There's the slightest, I mean, very, very slight browning on the very edges, which
On the edges.
that's typical in red wines. But I would say garnet with, you know, some plum overtones to it, you know, and that darker, more focused red-blue combo.
So you want us to try some food with it?
Well, you know, you've got the food. And
Yeah.
let's see.
Let's
the
go.
cheddar
So we've got a cheddar. We're gonna go for that first.
So,
this-
you have now, while you're doing that, let me ask you a question. Right before you do that, or while you're cutting, Lake County.
Yeah.
Lake County. So you've sourced some grapes from Lake County.
Yes.
How does that climate? How's that terroir different than, let's say, the Contra Costa or you know any other area, Napa, et cetera, that you've got it from?
Well, Contra Costa is a very warm area, also very sandy soils predominantly. Sandy predominantly, especially in the Antioch Oakley area. This is Oakley, where the vineyards for the Zinfandel are. I mean, the kind of sand that if you go out four-wheeling, you're going to sink up to your hubcaps. That's how sandy it is. Which is great drainage. You get very developed and very long root systems. Head pruned vines, a lot in Contra Costa, as well as some trellised. Head pruned means it kind of grows like a bush, so it's more freeform as opposed to being trained on wires. The Del Barba is predominantly head pruned. The Favaloro, which is a neighbor property, is the trellised. It's very warm in Contra Costa. It gets up well over, 104, 105, 106, 112. I mean, that's not atypical at all during the summertime.
And it cools down at night
pretty well
too.
at night, but yeah, maybe it's going to go down to the 70s,
Yeah.
which that
So you're
seems like
talking
a
a
big
lot of you're talking a lot of sugars being developed in that kind of climate.
The sugars come up earlier. I mean, so harvest in Contra Costa is generally sometime in August, starting in August and
As opposed to September, October.
September and October.
Yeah.
Whereas Lake County, you do get some warm days, but nowhere near the number. It's much cooler at night. This particular vineyard is located right on Clear Lake, and it's the property actually abuts all the way down to the edge of the lake. And the funny thing about that
Well, that has to be very scenic. That has to be a scenic.
It's gorgeous.
Gorgeous. It's a beautiful.
It's just
thing.
outside of Kelseyville, but there's a mistral that comes in from the lake that blows up through the vineyard all the time. And this vineyard's very steep. It has to be hand farmed and hand tended and hand picked, unless you have one of these uber sophisticated crawlers, which Phil does not have. So it's hand done. But the really cool thing about it is that mistral, like all of the smoke issues that have happened with the wildfires and such, the mistral keeps it so that the smoke doesn't ever come in and really affect his vineyard at all.
It just blows it away.
Yeah,
Blows it away.
for
So we've
all
been
of the
very
fires that
fortunate
have been,
for that.
you know, in that area, his fruit has never suffered the smoke taint issue, which is
We've
great.
never had those issues at all.
Yeah.
No.
And the mistral also gives a particular airflow to the vineyards.
Yeah, the mistral is a more aggressive wind flow. It's also mistral is down in the Rhone area in France that blows through the vineyards. It's that's why you also don't have as many mold and mildew issues, because even if it rains, that wind comes through and dries everything out pretty quickly, which is nice.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, this has been an interesting talk, guys. I don't want to take too much time. We've been on a little bit, and let's finish up with this this tasting and
Sure.
tell us
Right.
what you're pairing and how you think it goes. I know it goes well, but
So
Right.
we have cheddar cheese, and then we have these, what are these crackers called? It's got currants and different stuff in it. So there's a little tiny bit of sweetness to these crackers and almonds. But, we tasted the wine first, so we're going to go with the cracker and cheese first and then taste the wine.
So these crackers, they always have some kind of a dried fruit in them, as well as some kind of a nut in them. They're one of these shishi, more exotic crackers. I happen to like them because I like the
You're so shishi.
no, I'm not the shishi, but it's more I like the combinations of flavors, and that there's something different that you try every time. So in this one, there's almonds, and I believe it's cranberries.
Oh, cranberries.
Is the dried fruit that's in it. So they're kind of fun when you're tasting it, and then the dough of the cracker itself is relatively neutral.
So what happens to me is that the fruit becomes, more predominant. That really, comes out more. To you too?
Mm-hmm. But I would also say, especially with the cranberry, because the cranberry is a slightly more focused, edgier flavor as a dried fruit, that if you do, and then we also have these kind of beef flat, these are rosemary? Yeah.
No.
No.
Are they? I think
No.
they're just plain crackers. Let's do that. All right.
The plain cracker, clear your palate, then do the wine first, and then do the cheese and the other cracker.
Always good to have something that cleanses the palate, or just to sort of neutralize it.
You get that softer, more Zinfandel kind of thing, initial approach on what's going on. And then you slide into the Mourvedre and the Petite Syrah, and then it's a much broader mouthfeel to it. Whereas before, after the cheese and the cracker, it seemed more focused and narrower. So now I'm going to try the cheese and the cracker after the wine. And the really cool thing about it is now you get more of the dairy aspects of the cheddar, less of the edginess, more of that.
I was thinking that cheese is probably going to taste really creamy right about now.
And creamy.
Exactly.
That's exactly the right word. Is there's a creaminess, and you're talking about. I mean, it's a very aggressive cheddar. It's a hard cheddar. It's not a soft or mild cheddar. And then the cracker, forget the cranberry. That's almost an afterthought, and it's just somewhere, just kind of just washing, kind of sliding the colors around a little bit.
Well, that sounds really good.
I think wine and food pairing is just the most fun thing to do. I mean, it's like in one glass of wine, you have like 3 different wines depending on what you're eating and pairing it with. It's so cool.
Yeah,
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, what charcuterie do you have there? What sort of sausage or?
So this is three different Italian salamis. One is the basic dried salami. The other is with a black pepper, a cracked black pepper, and the other is almost like a sopressata. It has a little spiciness to it. So three different, different salamis. I mean, you can do
They'll all do the same
hams or whatever.
thing,
They're
yeah.
all different things. I expect that, depending if you did the black pepper salami first, and then did the wine, that again, the Mourvedre will pop out a little bit more, that edginess, that spicier component. If you do the dry one, it's probably going to be a little less aggressive that way. If you do the wine before either one of these, you'll get down to that, kind of softer, fleshy, the pork flavors of it more, and not accentuating so much on the spice.
It's funny, while I'm watching you do this, I keep thinking, oh, right about now, I could really go for some bread and some extra virgin olive oil to go with that wine. To go with that wine you have right there.
Nope. I just did the pepper because that's the most aggressive one. And the nice thing is that the pepper kind of just slides way back, and you're just getting a lot of this fleshy, wonderful, dark pork meat component.
What do you think, Barbara?
I'm loving it. I took a piece of the sort of the plainer salami, but it just really popped up the fruit again in the wine, and just
There's one other fun one that I want to do.
yes.
This is a chev with little wild blueberries on it.
That'll be fun.
Okay, I thought there was a drunken goat for a second there.
So if you look at this, you'll see it's really nicely purple, and the wild blueberries are really cool. This is a Trader Joe's special. It's very easy to find
It's
all
one
the
of our
time. It's not,
favorite
but it's a
cheeses.
great wine cheese.
Yeah.
So, again, we'll do both directions.
Here, let me take the other half from you.
Okay. Keeping in mind that the blueberries are going to be this initial flavor profile that you're going to get. Sorry, I'm speaking while I'm chewing.
We're having too much fun.
And you went way more to the exotic spice.
The fruit profile is sort of dampened down.
But if you went reversed, I mean, you'll get all of the fruit in the wine.
Yeah.
And actually, I want to see if I'm going to get more of the
Cleanse the
chev.
palate.
I was going to say this experiment is not over.
No, not yet.
No. Well, I tell people this experiment now is like every time you go out to dinner, you're going to love me because you're now getting 2 meals for the price of 1 by doing this experiment as you're eating your dinner and
And
drinking
2 bottles
your
of wine for the price of 1.
So a little bit more wine, and we'll do this first.
I wish you could have it too, Andre.
There should be some background music right about now. Drum roll.
So again, it's all that wonderful, soft red berry fruit that's coming through.
The cheese is messy, but it's good. And
it's all about the chev now. So chev, being a goat cheese, has a tendency to be a little edgy, which is kind of fun. But the blueberries become this decoration way in the background of what's going on in your palate.
Interesting, very interesting. So what, that is very interesting, but it does make sense. So you're basically right. You're eating every time you have it before you have the wine, with the wine, and after the wine. You are having a completely different experience each time.
with the food and the wine, depending on which way you're going.
Yeah, and it sounds like this wine is perfect for that. It's a we could say it's a gift. It's called the gift. We could say it's a gift for your palate.
Absolutely. And the nice thing is that there's enough seriousness of flavor that it can go towards more substantial meals, like think of short ribs or think of something braised, but it could also be something real simple like pizza. I mean, it's nice to have wines that lend themselves to, to a myriad of flavor profiles and flavor combinations.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we want to thank you for joining us today for this tasting of the Domaine de Taste, the gift that you have created in collaboration with TasteTV and the Taste Awards, and using your great sources of grapes and your extensive winemaking knowledge, and of course your blending knowledge. We have a wine here which is first class, and we really look forward to people enjoying it and finding out about it a lot more. So I want to thank you again for joining us today, and
Welcome.
Certainly. And we enjoyed putting this wine together for you guys.
Yeah,
So.
we had fun doing it.
So we have Kevin Brown, Barbara Brown of R&B Cellars, and the URL is rbcellars.com, and the URL for Domaine de Taste is domainedetaste.com. It's pretty straightforward. We like to keep everything simple. So thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.